The Great Hall of Nexus Prime stretched for miles in every direction. Crystal pillars reached toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves. In the center of this vast space, 3 beings sat around a table that could have held a small city. Kang Ho adjusted his crystalline form as he reviewed the latest reports. His body caught the light from a dozen suns and split it into rainbow patterns across the walls. As Admiral of the HFY fleet, he had seen more worlds burn than most beings could count. Today's numbers pleased him greatly. 847 worlds now bow to our might, he said, his voice like grinding glass. 23 species serve us completely. Not one has raised a weapon against us in the past 100 years. Across from him, Bora flickered between different energy states. Her form was pure light given thought, pure power given purpose. She commanded the Quilith intelligence networks that spanned half the galaxy. When she spoke, reality itself seemed to bend around her words. "Fear is a tool we have perfected," she said. "We can drive entire populations mad with a single broadcast. Their minds break before we even arrive. Some species beg us to enslave them just to make the psychological torture stop." The third being at the table was Taemin, whose body was a perfect fusion of flesh and machine. Cables ran through his veins like blood vessels. His eyes glowed with the power of a dozen computer cores. He represented the Threnodi, masters of biological and technological warfare. "Our latest creation exceeds all expectations," Taemin said as he activated a holographic display. "Nanoviruses that can rewrite DNA in real time. We can turn any carbon-based life form into whatever we need. Soldiers, workers, food sources. The applications are endless." The 3 species had ruled the galaxy for longer than some stars had existed. The HFY controlled through overwhelming force. Their ships could shatter planets with ease. Their weapons could boil away entire atmospheres. When they arrived at a world, surrender was the only option that led to survival. The Quilith had mastered the mind itself. They could project fear, madness, and despair across star systems. Entire civilizations had destroyed themselves rather than face what the Quilith could do to their thoughts. Mental torture was their specialty, and they had turned it into an art form. The Threnodi combined the worst of both organic and artificial life. They could create diseases that targeted specific genetic markers. They could build machines that consumed planets and turned them into more machines. They could make viruses that rewrote the very essence of what it meant to be alive. Together, these 3 species had divided the galaxy among themselves. Each controlled roughly 1/3 of all inhabited worlds. They had agreements about territory, trade, and the proper way to handle new species that might be discovered. The system worked perfectly because nothing could challenge them. Kang Ho brought up a star map that filled the air above their table. Red zones showed HFY territory. Blue zones belonged to the Quilith. Green areas were controlled by the Threnodi. The colors covered almost every inhabited system in the galaxy. "The expansion continues smoothly," he reported. "We have identified 17 new worlds suitable for resource extraction. All contain primitive life forms that will offer no resistance." "My analysts have studied their communication patterns," Bora added. "None have developed beyond basic tool use. We estimate complete pacification within 6 months of first contact." Taemin nodded his approval. "I will prepare the standard biological agents. A modified plague should reduce their numbers to manageable levels before we arrive." This was how it always went. The 3 species would find a new world, study its inhabitants briefly and then decide the most efficient way to claim it. Sometimes they would keep the native population as workers. Sometimes they would eliminate them entirely. Sometimes they would modify them into something more useful. The native species never had a choice in the matter. By the time the three great powers arrived, resistance was impossible. Their technology was too advanced, their methods too brutal, their coordination too perfect. Kang Ho remembered the early days when some species had tried to fight back. Those wars had been brief and one-sided. The Vorthak would arrive with their planet-killing weapons. The Quileth would broadcast madness until entire armies turned on each other. The Threnodi would release plagues that turned the enemy into allies. After a few examples, most species chose immediate surrender over pointless death. The galaxy grows quiet, Bora observed. It has been decades since we encountered anything that could even be called a challenge. Perhaps that is for the best, Taemin replied. Efficiency is preferable to entertainment. Kang Ho laughed, sound like crystal chimes in a hurricane. Entertainment? I had forgotten that conquest could be entertaining. Now it is simply routine. The three beings continued their meeting for several more hours. They discussed resource allocation, territorial boundaries, and plans for the next century of expansion. Everything proceeded according to established protocols. The galaxy was theirs, and they managed it like any other business. None of them could remember the last time they had felt surprise. None of them could recall when they had last encountered something unexpected. The universe had become predictable, orderly, and completely under their control. As the meeting ended, each representative prepared to return to their home worlds. They would implement the decisions made here. Their fleets would move to the next set of targets. The expansion would continue. Kang Ho reviewed the files one more time before departing. 17 new worlds to claim. 17 new species to evaluate. 17 more stepping stones toward complete galactic domination. The numbers meant nothing to him anymore. Worlds were just resources to be harvested. Species were just problems to be solved. Conquest was just another item on a very long list of administrative tasks. He closed the files and prepared to leave. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more reports, more routine decisions about the fate of entire civilizations. It was, he thought, a very organized way to run a galaxy. None of the three representatives noticed the small signal that had appeared on the edge of their sensors. It was too weak to be important, too distant to be relevant. Just background noise from some insignificant world in an unremarkable star system. The signal would sit in their databases for months before anyone bothered to analyze it. When they finally did, they would discover that it changed everything they thought they knew about the universe. But for now, the three most powerful beings in the galaxy went home to their respective worlds, completely confident that nothing could threaten their perfect order. They ruled over countless species and trillions of beings. They commanded weapons that could destroy solar systems. They had never known defeat. The concept of fear was something they inflicted on others, never something they experienced themselves. They were the apex predators of space, and they had grown comfortable in that role. That comfort would not last much longer. The monitoring station floated in the emptiness between stars, a metal island in an ocean of darkness. Omega-7 had been built by the Threnodi to watch the outer edges of their territory. For 30 years, it had detected nothing more interesting than cosmic radiation and the occasional asteroid. Hyun-woo had worked at the station for most of those 30 years. His cybernetic implants connected directly to the sensor arrays, allowing him to process data at speeds that would overwhelm a purely organic mind. He had become so used to the routine that he barely paid attention anymore. The signal appeared on his screens like a whisper in a thunderstorm. At first, he thought it was just another equipment malfunction. The sensors were old, and false readings happened frequently. But as he ran diagnostics, everything checked out perfectly. The signal was real. Hyun-woo leaned forward, his mechanical eyes focusing on the data stream. The signal was primitive by galactic standards. Instead of quantum entanglement or dimensional folding, it used simple electromagnetic waves, the kind of technology that most species abandoned after developing basic spaceflight. But something about the signal bothered him. The patterns were too complex for such a simple method of transmission. Mathematical equations that solved problems he had never seen before. Artistic expressions that followed no known aesthetic principles. And strangest of all, what appeared to be fictional stories. He had been monitoring alien communications for decades. Most species sent messages about trade, territory, or survival. Practical things, important things. These beings seemed to spend enormous amounts of time creating stories that never happened about people who never existed. The stories themselves were disturbing. They featured creatures that looked similar to the signal's creators, but they spent most of their time hurting each other in creative ways. They fought wars that lasted for years over concepts that made no sense. They killed each other for reasons that seemed trivial. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to enjoy it. Hyun-woo ran the signal through every analysis program available to him. The transmissions came from a small planet in an unremarkable star system. Initial scans showed a young civilization that had barely achieved nuclear technology. Their planet was mostly water, with large land masses covered in primitive cities. The beings themselves appeared to be bipedal mammals. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no obvious defenses. Their lifespans were incredibly short by galactic standards. They seemed to be one of the weakest species he had ever encountered. Yet their transmissions suggested something else entirely. He focused on their entertainment broadcasts first. Most species used entertainment to showcase their greatest achievements, or to honor their heroes. These beings created entertainment that celebrated violence, conflict, and suffering. They told stories about wars that had never happened and monsters that had never existed. Their news broadcasts were even more confusing. They reported on actual conflicts happening on their own planet. Members of their own species were fighting each other constantly. Not just individual conflicts, but organized warfare involving millions of their kind. According to their own records, they had been fighting continuously for their entire recorded history. Wars that lasted decades. Conflicts that consumed entire continents. Weapons that could destroy cities in seconds. Hyun-woo checked the data again. This could not be accurate. No species could survive constant warfare for thousands of years. They would have destroyed themselves or evolved beyond the need for violence. Yet the evidence was overwhelming. These creatures called themselves humans, and they appeared to be the most violent species he had ever encountered. He began analyzing their scientific transmissions next. This was where the data became truly confusing. Despite their primitive technology, their theoretical knowledge was extraordinary. They had developed mathematical concepts that the Threnody had only recently discovered. They understood physics principles that should have been beyond their capabilities. Most impressive was their rate of advancement. According to their own Historical records, they had gone from basic tool use to spaceflight in less than 10,000 years. The Vorthok had taken 50 times that long to achieve the same progress, but it was their medical knowledge that truly disturbed him. They had developed detailed understanding of anatomy, disease, and biological systems, not for healing, but for harming. Their medical texts read like torture manuals. They knew exactly how to cause pain, how to prolong suffering, how to keep someone alive while inflicting maximum damage. They had turned healing into a weapon. Hyun-woo realized he needed to report this discovery. The signal represented a new species, which meant first contact protocols would need to be activated. But something about these humans made him hesitate. He spent several more hours analyzing their transmissions. Their art depicted violence with disturbing beauty. Their music celebrated conflict and loss. Their literature explored the darkest aspects of consciousness with clinical precision. Most species developed culture to rise above their primitive instincts. These humans seemed to have developed culture to perfect those instincts. He began preparing his report for the Galactic Council. A new species had been discovered. They possessed unusual technological capabilities despite their primitive status. They showed signs of intelligence and creativity. They would likely be suitable for standard integration procedures. But as he wrote, Hyun-woo found himself struggling with the words. How could he explain what he had seen in their transmissions? How could he describe the casual way they discussed concepts that would traumatize most galactic civilizations? He decided to include everything: the mathematical proofs, the artistic expressions, the fictional stories, and the historical records. Let the council make sense of it all. Let them decide what to do with a species that seemed to have weaponized creativity itself. As he transmitted his report, Hyun-woo felt something he had not experienced in decades: a small, nagging uncertainty. For 30 years, every new discovery had fit neatly into established categories. Every alien species had behaved according to predictable patterns. These humans were different. He tried to dismiss the feeling. They were just another primitive species that would be integrated into the galactic community. Their unusual cultural expressions were probably just a phase they would outgrow once they encountered superior civilizations. But as he looked at their transmissions one more time, Hyun-woo could not shake the impression that he was looking at something that should not exist: a species that had turned horror into art, violence into science, and suffering into entertainment. His report would reach the council within days. Soon, the three great powers would decide what to do with these humans. The process was routine, predictable, and had never failed before. For the first time in his career, Hyun-woo wondered if routine would be enough. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with quiet efficiency as the three representatives reviewed Hyun-woo's report. The data streams flowed across holographic displays, showing the strange transmissions from the small blue planet. Mathematical equations, artistic expressions, and violent entertainment played in loops around the room. Woo-jin studied the information with the detached interest of someone who had seen this process hundreds of times before. As chief ambassador of the Vorthak, he was responsible for all first contact operations. The routine never varied. A new species would be discovered, evaluated, and integrated into the galactic community according to their usefulness. Another primitive species, he said, adjusting his crystalline form to catch the light better. Their technology level suggests they achieved spaceflight only recently. Their population appears manageable. Standard integration protocols should apply. Bora flickered through several energy states as she reviewed the psychological profiles. Her expertise in mental manipulation made her the obvious choice for evaluating new species. Most civilizations required careful conditioning before they could accept their place in the galactic order. Their thought patterns are unusual, she admitted, but nothing that cannot be corrected with proper mental adjustment. A few months of psychological conditioning should eliminate their more aggressive tendencies. Tae-min processed the biological data through his enhanced neural networks. The humans appeared to be standard carbon-based life forms with no unusual physical capabilities. Their genetic structure was surprisingly simple, which would make biological modification straightforward if needed. They show some promise for physical labor, he reported. Their musculature is inefficient but adaptable. With proper genetic enhancement, they could serve in mining operations or construction projects. The three representatives had conducted this same conversation countless times. A new species would be discovered, their capabilities assessed, and their fate decided based on their potential usefulness. The process was streamlined, efficient, and had never required more than a few hours of discussion. Wu Jin activated the preparation protocols for first contact. His ship, the Crystal Domination, was already being loaded with the standard equipment for species integration. Demonstration weapons, psychological conditioning devices, and biological modification tools. Everything needed to show a primitive civilization their new place in the universe. The Crystal Domination was one of the largest ships in the Vorthak fleet. It measured over 200 kilometers in length and contained enough firepower to destroy multiple star systems. Its shields could deflect any known weapon, and its sensors could analyze a planet's defenses from light years away. More importantly, it was designed to inspire immediate surrender. The ship's appearance alone had convinced dozens of species to submit without firing a single shot. Its crystalline hull reflected light in patterns that seemed to hypnotize observers. Its size made resistance appear pointless. "I will take a standard diplomatic team," Wu Jin announced. "Captain Dayun will handle military assessments. Intelligence Officer Mi-Ray will evaluate their cultural adaptation potential. The mission should be completed within one standard week." The plan was routine. The Crystal Domination would enter the human star system and broadcast the standard surrender demand. The humans would have 24 hours to respond. If they agreed to submit, integration would begin immediately. If they refused, demonstrations of superior firepower would convince them to reconsider. No species had ever required more than basic demonstrations. The sight of a Vorthak dreadnought was usually sufficient to end any thoughts of resistance. The few species that had attempted to fight back had been eliminated so quickly that other civilizations barely noticed their absence. As Wu Jin prepared for departure, he reviewed the human transmissions one more time. Their entertainment was certainly unusual, but many primitive species had strange cultural practices that disappeared once they encountered advanced civilization. Their violent tendencies would be corrected through standard psychological conditioning. The mathematical proofs were more interesting. Some of their theoretical work showed genuine creativity. With proper guidance, human scientists might contribute useful research to galactic knowledge. Their rapid technological advancement suggested they could be trained for complex tasks. Captain Da-Un joined him on the bridge as the Crystal Domination departed Nexus Prime. She had served on dozens of first contact missions and knew the routine perfectly. Her tactical assessments were always accurate, and her recommendations for force deployment had never failed. "The humans appear to have basic nuclear weapons," she reported. Their space-based defenses are primitive. Their military organization shows some structure, but their technology is centuries behind our own. I estimate complete military dominance within 6 hours if demonstrations become necessary. Intelligence Officer Mi Ray activated the cultural analysis systems as they entered hyperspace. Her job was to identify the human social structures that would need to be modified during integration. Most species required extensive cultural conditioning to accept their new role in the galactic community. Their social organization is complex, but manageable, she said after reviewing the data. Multiple competing governments, various religious systems, diverse cultural groups. Standard divide and control tactics should be effective. The journey to the human star system took 3 days. During the trip, the diplomatic team refined their integration plans. The humans would be given the choice between peaceful submission and forceful conquest. Their leaders would be identified and either recruited or eliminated. Their population would be evaluated for various work assignments. The process had been perfected over centuries of successful first contacts. Every species followed the same pattern once they understood the futility of resistance. Fear was a universal, constant, and the Galactic Council had learned to use it efficiently. As they approached the human solar system, Wu Jin felt the familiar satisfaction of another routine mission. The Crystal Domination's sensors began analyzing the human planet's defenses. Primitive satellites, basic space stations, and what appeared to be experimental weapons platforms. Nothing that could threaten a Vorthak dreadnought. Broadcast the standard surrender demand, Wu Jin ordered. All frequencies, all languages. Give them the customary 24 hours to respond. The message was simple and had been refined through countless first contacts. The humans were informed that their planet had been selected for integration into the galactic community. Resistance was futile. Submission would be rewarded with protection and guidance. Defiance would result in immediate conquest. The response came back within hours, much faster than expected. Most species required the full 24-hour period to accept their situation. The humans had apparently grasped the futility of resistance quickly, but when the translation systems processed the human response, Wu Jin realized something was wrong. We need to discuss this. Give us 24 hours. No species had ever asked for time to consider surrender. The choice was always immediate: submit or be destroyed. The concept of negotiation had never occurred to any civilization when faced with overwhelming superiority. Wu Jin reviewed the message several times to ensure the translation was accurate. The humans were not accepting surrender. They were not refusing it either. They were asking for time to evaluate their options, as if they had options to evaluate. Captain Da Yun ran additional scans of the human defenses. Her readings showed the same primitive technology they had detected before. No hidden weapons, no advanced shields, no secret alliances with other species. They appear to be stalling for time, she reported. Perhaps they hope to evacuate their leaders or hide valuable resources. Should we proceed with immediate conquest? Wu Jin considered the options. Standard protocol called for immediate action if a species refused to surrender within the allotted time. But the humans had not refused. They had requested additional time, which was not covered by any existing procedures. We will honor their request, he decided. 24 hours will not allow them to develop effective defenses. Their response should provide additional insight into their psychology. The decision felt strange. For the first time in his career, Wu Jin was deviating from established protocols. But the human response had been so unexpected that he felt compelled to see what they would do with the extra time. He had no idea that those 24 hours would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about primitive species. The 24-hour deadline passed with unusual precision. Exactly one standard day after their original request, the humans transmitted their response to the crystal domination. Wu Jin expected either unconditional surrender or a desperate plea for mercy. Most species chose one of those options once they had time to fully comprehend their situation. Instead, the human transmission began with technical specifications. Captain Da-Un was the first to notice something wrong. Her tactical display lit up with warnings as the human message streamed across her screens. The data was not random. It was not desperate. It was a complete technical analysis of the crystal domination itself. "They have detailed schematics of our ship," she reported, her voice betraying the first hint of confusion she had shown in decades. "Hull composition, power distribution, weapon systems, shield frequencies, down to the quantum level." Wu Jin studied the data with growing disbelief. The humans had somehow reverse-engineered Vorthak technology in less than 24 hours, technology that had taken his species millennia to develop, technology that was supposed to be impossible to analyze without direct physical access. But that was only the beginning. The transmission continued with weapon specifications, not requests for weapons or desperate attempts to build defenses. Blueprints for devices specifically designed to counter Vorthak shielding technology. Step by step, instructions for creating ammunition that could penetrate crystalline armor. Mathematical proofs showing exactly how to disrupt their ship's power systems. Intelligence Officer Mai Ray ran the data through every analysis program available. The weapons described in the human transmission were not theoretical. They were practical, efficient, and could be built using materials available on the human planet. More disturbing still, some of the designs were improvements on existing Vorthak technology. "They have identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in our ship's design," she reported. "Vulnerabilities that our own engineers have never discovered. They are providing solutions to problems we did not know existed." The transmission continued with casualty estimates. The humans had calculated exactly how many Vorthak would die if they implemented their weapon designs. They provided time estimates for different attack scenarios. They described the most efficient ways to disable the ship without causing unnecessary destruction. The tone was clinical, professional, almost bored. They were not threatening or pleading. They were explaining technical procedures as if they were reading from a maintenance manual. Wu Jin felt something he had never experienced before. A cold sensation that seemed to start in his crystalline core and spread throughout his body. For the first time in his existence, he was beginning to understand what fear felt like. The human transmission ended with a message that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "We don't want to do this, but we will if we have to. Please reconsider your approach." The words were simple, polite, almost friendly, but the implications were terrifying. The humans were not afraid of the crystal domination. They were concerned about what they might have to do to it. Captain Da-Un ran emergency diagnostics on all ship systems. The human analysis had been so accurate that she needed to verify their defenses were still functional. Every system checked out perfectly, but somehow that made the situation worse. The humans had identified ways to destroy them that their own technology could not detect. "How is this possible?" she asked. "They are a primitive species. Their technology is centuries behind our own. They should not be able to analyze our ship from external scans." Wu Jin had no answer. In all his years of first contact operations, he had never encountered anything like this. Species either surrendered immediately or fought with inferior weapons until they were quickly defeated. None had ever demonstrated superior analytical capabilities. Intelligence Officer Mirai began reviewing the human transmissions they had intercepted earlier. Their entertainment, their scientific broadcasts, their historical records. She was looking for clues that might explain their unexpected capabilities. What she found was even more disturbing. The humans had been broadcasting detailed technical discussions about hypothetical alien encounters for decades. They had spent enormous amounts of time developing strategies for fighting technologically superior enemies. They had created entertainment that explored every possible scenario for alien invasion. They had been preparing for this moment their entire civilization. They have thousands of theoretical studies on asymmetric warfare, Mirai reported. Combat strategies designed specifically for fighting enemies with superior technology. They have explored every possible tactical scenario. More disturbing, still, their theoretical work was incredibly sophisticated. They had developed concepts for biological warfare, psychological manipulation, and technological sabotage that rivaled anything in the galactic databases. They had turned speculation into science. Captain Dayun focused on their military preparations. According to their own records, humans had been fighting each other continuously for thousands of years. They had experience with every type of conflict imaginable: conventional warfare, guerrilla tactics, psychological operations, technological warfare. They had practiced on each other. They have detailed knowledge of combat stress, tactical adaptation, and battlefield innovation, she reported. They have documented strategies for fighting enemies with superior numbers, better weapons, and advanced technology. They have actually implemented these strategies in real conflicts. The implications were staggering. Most species achieved peace once they developed advanced technology. War became obsolete when survival was no longer a concern. The humans had continued fighting even after eliminating scarcity, disease, and most external threats. They fought because they wanted to fight. Wu Jin realized that everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about primitive species was wrong. The humans were not primitive. They were specialized. They had focused their entire development on becoming more effective at conflict. While other species developed art, philosophy, and peaceful cooperation, humans had developed better ways to kill each other. While other civilizations grew beyond the need for violence, humans had refined violence into an exact science. The crystal domination had weapons that could destroy planets. The humans had minds that could find ways to turn those weapons against their owners. "What are our options?" Captain Da'un asked. Wu Jin considered the situation carefully. They could proceed with the original conquest plan and hope that superior firepower would overcome human ingenuity. They could retreat and report that the humans were too dangerous to approach. They could attempt to negotiate some kind of peaceful solution. All of the options felt wrong. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that challenged everything the galaxy understood about technological development. They had shown that intelligence could be more dangerous than weapons. Send a message to the Galactic Council, he decided. Full priority transmission. We need guidance for a situation that is not covered by existing protocols. As the message prepared for transmission, Wu Jin looked at the small blue planet hanging in space before them. It appeared so peaceful, so harmless. The humans living on its surface seemed fragile and vulnerable, but appearances, he was learning, could be very deceptive. The humans had spent 24 hours analyzing his ship and developing ways to destroy it. They had demonstrated analytical capabilities that surpassed his own species. They had done all of this while remaining perfectly polite and reasonable. For the first time in galactic history, a primitive species had made an advanced civilization reconsider its approach to first contact. The humans had not threatened them or begged for mercy. They had simply explained in detail exactly how outmatched the crystal domination really was. The most terrifying part was their tone. They were not angry or desperate. They were patient, methodical, and completely confident in their analysis. Wu Jin began to understand that the humans were not afraid of dying. They were afraid of what they might have to do to survive. Intelligence Officer Mi Ray had always prided herself on her ability to understand alien psychology. Her enhanced neural networks could process cultural data at incredible speeds, identifying patterns and motivations that might take others years to comprehend. But as she dove deeper into human historical records, something fundamental began to break in her understanding of how intelligent life was supposed to develop. The humans had been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. Not brief conflicts over scarce resources, which was common among developing species. Not territorial disputes that lasted a few years until boundaries were established. Continuous, systematic warfare spanning thousands of years, with no significant periods of peace. Mi Ray started with their most recent conflicts, thinking that surely a species approaching spaceflight would have moved beyond primitive violence. Instead, she found records of 2 global wars within a single century. Wars that had involved the entire planet and killed millions of humans. The scale was incomprehensible. These were not battles between armies, but total wars that targeted entire populations. The humans had developed weapons specifically designed to kill civilians. They had created strategies for destroying cities, contaminating farmland, and breaking the will of entire nations. But it was not just the scale that disturbed her. It was the innovation. Humans did not simply fight wars. They studied war. They analyzed every aspect of conflict and developed new methods of destruction with scientific precision. They had universities dedicated to military strategy. They had research institutions focused entirely on developing better ways to kill. Mi Ray found records of something called the Manhattan Project, where humans had spent enormous resources developing weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. Not because they were threatened by a superior enemy, but because they were fighting other humans who looked exactly like them. The psychological profiles made no sense. According to every model of civilizational development, species should become less violent as they advanced. Technology should eliminate the need for conflict by providing abundance and security. Intelligence should lead to cooperation and peaceful problem-solving. Humans had used their advancing technology to become more efficient killers. They had applied their intelligence to perfecting the art of destruction. They had achieved abundance and used it to fund larger armies. She decided to go further back in their history, hoping to find the point where they had transitioned from primitive violence to civilized cooperation. Instead, she found that the violence only got worse the deeper she looked. The humans had fought with every weapon imaginable: swords, arrows, guns, explosives, chemical weapons, biological agents, and nuclear devices. They had used fire, water, earth, and air as weapons. They had weaponized disease, starvation, and weather itself. More disturbing still, they had made art from it. Mi Ray found thousands of years of literature celebrating war, poetry that glorified battle, music that honored fallen soldiers, paintings that captured the beauty of destruction, stories that made heroes out of killers. They had turned violence into culture. She analyzed their military strategies and found innovations that surpassed anything in the galactic databases. Humans had developed concepts for psychological warfare that could drive enemies insane. They had created tactics for fighting in every possible environment. They had designed strategies for winning battles against superior numbers, better equipment, and advanced technology. They had learned to make weakness into strength. The record showed that humans regularly fought enemies who outnumbered them, 10 to 1, and won through superior tactics. They had defeated technologically advanced opponents by using their environment creatively. They had turned their own disadvantages into weapons. Most disturbing of all, they had survived things that should have ended their species entirely. Mi Ray found records of ice ages that had covered most of their planet in glaciers, volcanic eruptions that had blocked out their sun for years, asteroid impacts that had caused mass extinctions, plagues that had killed significant portions of their population. Each time they had not just survived, but emerged stronger, more adaptable, and more dangerous. The psychological analysis was beyond her comprehension. Humans could function normally after experiencing trauma that would drive most galactic species insane. They could compartmentalize horror in ways that allowed them to continue fighting even after witnessing atrocities. They had soldiers who could kill enemies in the morning and then eat dinner with their families in the evening. They had civilians who could watch their cities burn and then immediately start planning to rebuild them. They had leaders who could order the deaths of millions and then sleep peacefully at night. Mi Ray tried to understand their motivations, but human reasoning defied every psychological model she knew. They fought for concepts that made no logical sense. Abstract ideas like honor, freedom, and justice. Territorial claims that provided no strategic advantage. Religious beliefs that offered no practical benefits. They would die for ideas. More terrifying still, they would kill for ideas. Humans had committed genocide against their own species over philosophical differences. They had waged wars lasting decades over interpretations of religious texts. They had destroyed civilizations because they disagreed with their form of government. The tape. Historical records showed that humans had developed every conceivable method of inflicting suffering. Not just killing, but torture designed to extract information, break spirits, or simply cause pain. They had created institutions dedicated to studying the most effective ways to make other beings suffer. They had made science out of cruelty. But what truly broke Mi Ray's understanding was the realization that humans did not just survive their violent history. They celebrated it. Their greatest heroes were warriors. Their most honored leaders were generals. Their most beloved stories were about conflict and conquest. Violence was not a bug in human psychology. It was a feature. She began to understand why their response to the crystal domination had been so disturbing. The humans had not been threatened by superior firepower because they had spent their entire existence learning to fight superior enemies. They had not been intimidated by advanced technology because they had always found ways to turn enemy advantages against them. The Galactic Council had assumed that primitive species would be afraid of advanced civilizations. But humans had been preparing for this encounter their entire history. Every war they had fought against each other had been training for the day they would face an external threat. They had practiced on themselves, so they would be ready for anyone else. Mi Ray compiled her report with growing dread. The humans were. Not just another primitive species to be integrated into the galactic community. They were a civilization that had weaponized evolution itself. They had turned their entire development process into preparation for conflict. Most species developed technology to make life easier. Humans had developed technology to make death more efficient. Most civilizations created culture to promote peace and cooperation. Humans had created culture that glorified war and competition. They were not trying to become more civilized. They were trying to become more dangerous. As she transmitted her findings to the Galactic Council, Mireille realized that everything they thought they knew about primitive species was wrong. The humans were not primitive. They were specialized predators who had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of destruction, and now they were about to encounter a galaxy that had grown soft from millennia of unchallenged dominance. For the first time in her career, Mireille found herself wondering if the three great powers were prepared for what they had awakened. The humans had spent their entire history learning to fight enemies who were stronger, smarter, and better equipped than they were. The Galactic Council was about to discover what it felt like to be on the other side of that equation. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of receiving Mireille's report. The three representatives materialized in the Great Hall of Nexus Prime, their forms crackling with tension that had not been present in centuries. The data streams from the human encounter filled the air around them like storm clouds. Fleet Admiral Jun Ho of the Vorthak military reviewed the tactical analysis with growing alarm. His crystalline form shifted through darker shades as he processed the implications of what the crystal domination had discovered. In 3,000 years of galactic conquest, no primitive species had ever demonstrated the capabilities these humans possessed. "The threat assessment is clear," he announced, his voice resonating with the authority of someone who had never known defeat. "This species represents an existential danger to galactic stability. They must be eliminated completely before they can develop further." Bora flickered through several energy states as she studied the psychological profiles. Her expertise in mental manipulation had never encountered anything like human psychology. Their ability to compartmentalize trauma and function through horror defied every model of consciousness she understood. "Conventional psychological warfare will not be effective," she admitted, the first time in her existence she had acknowledged the limits of her capabilities. "Their minds are structured to process extreme violence as normal experience. Fear, which has always been our most reliable tool, appears to motivate them rather than paralyze them." Taemin interfaced directly with the biological analysis systems, his cybernetic components working at maximum capacity to understand the human genetic structure. What he found challenged everything the Threnodi thought they knew about evolutionary development. "Their biology is optimized for survival under extreme stress," he reported. "High pain tolerance, rapid healing, adaptive immune systems, and neurological structures that allow function under conditions that would incapacitate most species. They appear to have evolved specifically for warfare." The three representatives had ruled the galaxy through a combination of overwhelming force, psychological dominance, and biological superiority. For the first time in millennia, they had encountered a species that seemed immune to all three approaches. Fleet Admiral Jun Ho activated the military mobilization protocols. If the humans could not be conquered through conventional first contact procedures, they would be eliminated through total warfare. The combined fleets of all three species would be deployed to ensure complete destruction. "I am authorizing the deployment of 10,000 ships," he announced. "Vorthak dreadnoughts, Quilith mine ships, and Threnody biovessels. Full planetary sterilization protocols will be implemented. No human settlements will be allowed to survive. The fleet began assembling immediately. Ships that had not moved in centuries powered up their weapons systems. Crews that had known only routine patrols prepared for actual combat. The largest military force in galactic history converged on the human star system. The battle plan was simple and overwhelming. The combined fleet would enter the system in 3 waves. The Vorthak would lead with their planet-killing weapons, destroying Earth's defenses and major population centers. The Quilith would follow with psychological attacks, broadcasting madness and despair to break any remaining resistance. The Threnody would finish the operation with biological weapons that would eliminate any survivors. Fleet Admiral Jun Ho estimated the battle would last no more than 6 hours. The humans had shown analytical capabilities and innovative thinking, but they lacked the technology and numbers to resist such overwhelming force. Their planet would be reduced to cosmic dust before they could implement any of their theoretical weapon designs. The first wave entered the human star system exactly as planned. 3,000 Vorthak dreadnoughts materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls reflecting the light of the human sun, their weapons powered up immediately, targeting the major population centers on Earth. Captain Dae-Yun, now commanding a squadron of heavy cruisers, monitored the human response from her flagship. Initial scans showed exactly what they expected. Primitive space-based defenses, basic nuclear weapons, and what appeared to be hastily constructed orbital platforms. The humans were attempting to resist with technology that was centuries behind. Galactic standards. All ships, commence planetary bombardment, Fleet Admiral Jun Ho ordered. Target major cities first, then industrial centers. Leave no structure intact. The Vorthak fleet opened fire with weapons that could shatter continents. Energy beams that could boil oceans struck the Earth's surface, creating explosions visible from space. The first wave of attacks should have ended human civilization instantly. Instead, something impossible happened. The human defenses held. Captain Da-Yun stared at her tactical displays in disbelief. The primitive orbital platforms were somehow deflecting weapons that should have vaporized them instantly. The hastily constructed shields were absorbing energy that should have overwhelmed any known defensive technology. "How are they doing this?" she demanded of her tactical officer. The answer came in the form of human counterattacks. Weapons emerged from concealed positions throughout the solar system. Not the primitive nuclear devices they had expected, but sophisticated energy weapons that targeted the weak points the humans had identified in their technical analysis. The first Vorthak ship to be destroyed was the Eternal Crystal, a dreadnought, that had participated in the conquest of 200 worlds. Human weapons found the exact vulnerabilities Mi-Ray had warned about, penetrating its shields and detonating its power core in a matter of seconds. More ships began dying as the humans implemented the weapon designs they had transmitted to the Crystal Domination. Every shot was precise, targeting critical systems with surgical accuracy. The humans were not just fighting back, they were dissecting the Vorthak fleet with clinical efficiency. But it was not the tactical precision that terrified the galactic forces. It was the human communications during the battle. Captain Da-Un intercepted human military broadcasts and found something that challenged her understanding of how species were supposed to behave during life-or-death conflicts. The humans were not desperate or afraid. They were excited. Their combat communications were filled with what could only be described as enthusiasm. They discussed tactics with the passion of artists creating masterpieces. They celebrated successful kills with genuine joy. They treated the destruction of galactic warships as entertainment. "They are enjoying this," she reported to Fleet Admiral Jun Ho, her voice betraying a confusion she had never experienced before. The second wave of the attack brought the Quilith mine ships into range. Bora led the psychological assault personally, broadcasting waves of fear, despair, and madness toward the human planet. The mental attacks had broken entire civilizations within minutes. The humans responded by broadcasting back. The transmissions that reached the Quilith ships were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Instead of the usual screams of terror or pleas for mercy, the humans sent detailed recordings of their own historical atrocities, images of genocide, torture, and mass destruction that they had inflicted on themselves. But the recordings were not sent as threats or attempts at intimidation. They were sent as gifts. The humans were sharing their favorite examples of horror as if they were showing artwork to interested visitors. They provided historical context, technical explanations, and artistic analysis of their most brutal achievements. Bora realized with growing terror that the humans were not just immune to psychological warfare. They had weaponized their own trauma and were using it to break the minds of their attackers. Several Quilith mine ships simply stopped functioning as their crews were overwhelmed by the sheer scope of human brutality. Not because the images were more horrific than anything they had seen before, but because the humans discussed them with such casual appreciation. The third wave brought the Threnody bioships into the battle. Taemin deployed the most advanced biological weapons in the galactic arsenal. Nanoviruses designed to rewrite human DNA, airborne toxins that could kill entire populations, and synthetic plagues that could eliminate carbon-based life. The humans had been prepared for biological warfare as well. Their response was not defensive countermeasures or medical treatments. Instead, they released their own biological agents that had been designed specifically to target the mixed organic-mechanical nature of Threnody physiology. The humans had somehow developed biological weapons that could infect cybernetic components while simultaneously attacking organic tissues. Viruses that treated the boundary between flesh and machine as irrelevant. As Threnody ships began falling to diseases that should not have been able to affect them, Taemin realized that the humans had somehow weaponized evolution itself. Their biological agents were adapting in real time, overcoming defensive measures faster than they could be implemented. The battle that was supposed to last 6 hours stretched into days as the human resistance not only held, but began pushing back. Ships that had. The war had been raging for 2 weeks when the first galactic commander broke completely. Yu Jin, a Quilith battle coordinator who had overseen the conquest of 40 star systems, simply stopped responding to communications after witnessing a human tactical maneuver that defied every principle of civilized warfare. The humans had somehow captured 3 intact Vorthak cruisers, not through overwhelming firepower or superior technology, but through what could only be described as psychological manipulation on a strategic scale. They had convinced the crews to surrender by transmitting detailed historical accounts of human prisoner-of-war camps. Not threats of what would happen to captured aliens, but educational documentaries about what humans had done to other humans. During their various conflicts, Yu Jin had monitored the transmissions as the human broadcasts systematically broke down the mental defenses of species that had never known defeat. The humans explained their techniques with the enthusiasm of teachers, sharing favorite lessons. They provided historical context, strategic analysis, and even artistic appreciation for their most effective methods of psychological destruction. The Vorthak crews had surrendered not because they feared death, but because they feared what the humans might consider entertainment. Commander Da-Un tried to maintain tactical coherence as her fleet was slowly dismantled by human forces that seemed to be conducting experiments rather than fighting for survival. The humans would capture ships, study them briefly, then release detailed technical specifications showing how to improve their design. They were not just defeating galactic technology, they were correcting it. They are treating this as a learning experience, she reported to Fleet Admiral Jun-Ho during one of the few secure communications that had not been intercepted and analyzed by human intelligence operations. Every engagement provides them with new data. Every weapon we deploy is immediately countered and improved upon. The most disturbing aspect was the human battle communications. Da-Un had expected desperate coordination between forces fighting for their species' survival. Instead, she intercepted conversations that sounded like academic discussions between enthusiastic researchers. Human military units discussed tactics with the passion of artists debating technique. They analyzed galactic weapon systems with the curiosity of scientists encountering fascinating new specimens. They celebrated successful engagements with the joy of students mastering difficult concepts. They were not afraid of the galactic fleets. They were grateful for the educational opportunity. Admiral Jun-Ho realized that his strategic assumptions had been fundamentally wrong from the beginning. The humans were not responding to the galactic invasion as a threat to be repelled. They were treating it as a comprehensive examination of their theoretical preparations. Every strategy they had developed during their millennia of internal warfare was being tested against real opponents. Every weapon design they had imagined was being validated against actual targets. Every tactical innovation they had proposed was being implemented under combat conditions. The humans had turned the invasion into their final examination. The breaking point came when the humans began demonstrating capabilities that went beyond anything they had revealed in their initial technical analysis. Ships that could phase between dimensions to avoid attacks. Weapons that could rewrite the fundamental forces holding matter together. Defensive systems that seemed to violate basic laws of physics. Intelligence Officer Mirai, monitoring human communications from her position aboard the Crystal Domination, discovered that these advanced technologies were not recent developments. They were systems the humans had been secretly developing for decades, waiting for the day they would encounter a technologically superior enemy. They have been preparing for this specific scenario their entire space age, she reported, not just preparing to defend against invasion, but preparing to learn from it. They have used our attack as an opportunity to field-test weapon systems we never could have imagined. The psychological impact on galactic forces was devastating. Species that had never known defeat were being outmaneuvered by enemies they had assumed were primitive. Crews that had conquered thousands of worlds were being taught lessons in warfare by a civilization that had barely achieved interstellar flight. But it was not the military defeat that broke the galactic resistance. It was the realization of what the humans were really doing. The humans began broadcasting live feeds of their interrogation sessions with captured galactic personnel. Not brutal torture sessions designed to extract information, but educational seminars where humans politely asked about galactic psychology, social structures, and technological capabilities. The humans were not trying to break their prisoners. They were trying to understand them, but their methods of understanding were more terrifying than any torture could have been. They used techniques that combined advanced psychology, neurological scanning, and social manipulation to create complete profiles of galactic civilization. Within hours of capture, human researchers could predict how any galactic species would respond to specific stimuli. They could identify psychological weaknesses that the species themselves were not aware of. They could design targeted strategies for manipulating entire civilizations. Commander Yu Jin received detailed psychological analyses of her own species, transmitted directly to her command ship. The humans had identified fundamental flaws in Quileth mental architecture that made them vulnerable to specific types of sensory input. They provided step-by-step instructions for inducing madness in Quileth individuals or entire populations. Then they politely explained that they had no intention of using this information aggressively, but wanted to share their research in the spirit of scientific cooperation. The humans were not just defeating galactic forces. They were teaching them how completely they could be defeated. Admiral Jun-ho made the decision that would end the war when he realized that the humans had been allowing galactic ships to escape, not because they could not destroy them, but because they wanted those ships to carry reports back to the rest of the galaxy. The humans were not trying to conquer galactic territory. They were sending a message. The message became clear when human forces could have pressed their advantage and eliminated the remaining galactic fleets entirely. Instead, they broadcast a simple communication to all surviving ships. We hope this demonstration has been educational. Please return to your home worlds and share what you have learned. We have no interest in conquest or expansion, but we wanted to ensure that our capabilities were properly understood. The humans provided detailed technical specifications for all the weapons they had used during the conflict, not as threats, but as educational materials. They explained exactly how they had analyzed galactic technology, developed countermeasures, and implemented improvements. They turned their entire war strategy into a teaching curriculum. The final psychological blow came when the humans transmitted their casualties reports. Despite facing the largest military force in galactic history, human losses had been minimal. Not because they had overwhelming defenses, but because they had fought with a level of tactical sophistication that made galactic resistance largely ineffective. The humans had not just won the war. They had made it look easy. As the surviving galactic fleets limped back toward their home worlds, the crews carried with them the knowledge that everything they thought they understood about warfare, technology, and civilization had been fundamentally wrong. They had encountered a species that treated existential conflict as entertainment, used superior enemies as educational opportunities, and turned the threat of extinction into a chance for scientific advancement. For the first time in galactic history, the three great powers had experienced what it meant to be completely outmatched by a supposedly inferior opponent. They had learned what it felt like to be the primitive species encountering advanced civilization. The humans had not conquered them through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had conquered them by demonstrating that the very concept of superiority was more complex than the galaxy had ever imagined. As Admiral Jun-ho composed his final report on the conflict, he realized that the humans had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had won a war without wanting to win it, demonstrated superiority without claiming it, and taught lessons without demanding surrender. They had shown the galaxy what true apex predators looked like. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. The three representatives who had once commanded the galaxy with absolute authority now sat in stunned silence, reviewing the final reports from the human conflict. The holographic displays around them showed empty space where thousands of their ships had once patrolled. Ambassador Na Young of the hastily reformed Galactic Council read the human peace terms for the third time, hoping to find some hidden threat or demand for tribute. Instead, she found only the most terrifying document in galactic history, a simple request to be left alone. "They want nothing from us," she reported to the assembled representatives. "No territory, no resources, no tribute, no acknowledgement of superiority. They simply request that we maintain a minimum distance of 100 light-years from their star system." The terms were beyond the comprehension of species that had spent millennia conquering and subjugating others. Victory was supposed to bring expansion, wealth, and dominance. The humans had achieved total victory and asked for isolation. Fleet Admiral Jun-Ho, his crystalline form now permanently darkened with what could only be described as trauma, reviewed the final casualty reports. His fleet of 10,000 ships had been reduced to fewer than 3,000 functional vessels. The humans had accomplished this with a force that numbered in the hundreds. "They could have eliminated us entirely," he said, his voice carrying none of its former authority. "At any point during the conflict, they had the capability to destroy our remaining forces. They chose not to. The implications were clear and terrifying. The humans had not been fighting for survival. They had been conducting a demonstration of their capabilities. The entire war had been an educational exercise designed to teach the galaxy a lesson about the nature of real power." Bora flickered weakly between energy states as she processed the psychological analysis of human behavior during the conflict. Her understanding of consciousness itself had been shattered by exposure to minds that operated according to principles she could not comprehend. "They appeared to enjoy the conflict," she reported. "Not in the way that aggressive species take, pleasure in domination, but in the way that researchers enjoy solving complex problems. They treated our invasion as an intellectual challenge." The human response to galactic aggression had revealed something that challenged every assumption about civilized behavior. They had not become angry or desperate when faced with extinction. They had become curious and methodical. Tae-min interfaced with the biological analysis systems one final time, reviewing the data on human physiology that had been gathered during the conflict. The results continued to defy every model of evolutionary development. "They are apex predators disguised as social mammals," he concluded. "Their entire biology is optimized for survival under extreme conditions. Their psychology is structured to treat existential threats as normal environmental factors. They have evolved to thrive in circumstances that would destroy most species." The treaty negotiations had been the most unsettling experience in galactic diplomatic history. The humans had arrived at the neutral meeting point in a single small ship, accompanied by what appeared to be a standard diplomatic team. They had been polite, reasonable, and completely unconcerned about the thousands of galactic warships surrounding them. Ambassador Na Young had expected demands for unconditional surrender, reparations, or territorial concessions. Instead, human diplomats had spent most of the meeting asking questions about galactic culture, technology, and social structures. They seemed genuinely interested in learning about the civilizations they had just defeated. The human ambassador, a female who introduced herself simply as Dr. Hye Jin, had presented the peace terms with the casual manner of someone discussing routine administrative procedures. She had explained that humanity had no interest in galactic politics, expansion, or conquest. "We just want to continue our development without interference," Dr. Hye Jin had said. "We understand that our methods may seem unusual to galactic civilization, but we have found them effective for our particular circumstances." The understatement had been so profound that Ambassador Na Young had initially thought it was some form of psychological warfare. The humans had just demonstrated the ability to destroy the most powerful military force in galactic history, and they described it as unusual methods. But as the negotiations continued, it became clear that the humans genuinely saw their overwhelming victory as a minor deviation from their preferred isolation. They had not wanted to fight the galactic forces. They had simply responded to aggression with the tools they had available. The most disturbing aspect of the human peace proposal was their offer to share their military innovations with galactic civilization, not as a threat or a demonstration of superiority, but as a contribution to scientific knowledge. "We have developed some interesting solutions to common problems," Dr. Hai Jin had explained. "We would be happy to share our research if it would be helpful." The humans were offering to give away the weapons that had defeated the galaxy's most powerful fleets. They treated military technology that could revolutionize warfare as academic research worth sharing with colleagues. Ambassador Na Young had declined the offer immediately. The last thing galactic civilization needed was access to human military innovations. The weapons they had already demonstrated were beyond the comprehension of most species, but the offer itself had revealed something terrifying about human psychology. They did not see their military capabilities as sources of power or advantage. They saw them as interesting technical solutions to environmental challenges. The final terms of the peace treaty were simple and non-negotiable. All galactic forces would withdraw from human space immediately. No ships, probes, or communication attempts would be directed toward the human star system. Humans would remain in their designated area and would not expand aggressively into galactic territory. In exchange, the humans agreed not to develop additional military technologies specifically designed to target galactic species. They would not share their existing weapons with other civilizations. They would not interfere with galactic politics or territorial disputes. The treaty created a buffer zone around human space that no galactic civilization was allowed to enter. The humans had effectively quarantined themselves from the rest of the galaxy, not because they were afraid of contamination, but because they understood that their presence would be disruptive to galactic stability. As the galactic representatives prepared to return to their home worlds, Dr. Hyejin had offered one final observation that would haunt them for the rest of their existence. "We hope this experience has been educational," she had said with genuine warmth. "We understand that our approach to problem-solving may seem extreme, but it has served us well throughout our history. We look forward to peaceful coexistence with galactic civilization." The humans described their overwhelming military victory as an educational experience. They characterized their demonstration of superior capabilities as an approach to problem-solving. They expressed hope for peaceful coexistence with civilizations they could have conquered easily. Now, months after the treaty signing, the galaxy had settled into a new reality. The three great powers continued to rule their respective territories, but they did so with the knowledge that their supremacy was conditional. Somewhere in a small corner of space, a species existed that could end their dominance whenever they chose to do so. The buffer zone around human space had become the most carefully monitored region in the galaxy, not because anyone wanted to invade it, but because everyone wanted to ensure that nothing was coming out of it. Long-range sensors watched constantly for any sign that humans might be expanding beyond their designated area. The psychological impact on galactic civilization was profound and lasting. Children of the former galactic powers were no longer told stories about their species' inevitable conquest of the universe. Instead, they learned cautionary tales about the small blue planet where apex predators had learned to disguise themselves as peaceful mammals. Sleep cycles across the galaxy were disrupted by nightmares about human capabilities that had not been revealed during the conflict. If their demonstrated weapons were just a sample of their capabilities, what else might they be hiding in their isolated star system? The humans had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had won a war so completely that their enemies were grateful to be allowed to survive. They had demonstrated superiority so overwhelming that their opponents begged for the privilege of being ignored. Most disturbing of all, they had done it while maintaining the polite, reasonable demeanor of researchers conducting an interesting experiment. The galaxy's new unofficial motto had indeed become, "Nothing in the universe made them afraid," then humanity showed them horror. But the real horror was not the human capacity for violence or their technological innovations. The real horror was the realization that humans had turned the destruction of galactic supremacy into just another day at work. As Ambassador Na Young filed her final report on the human conflict, she included a recommendation that would become galactic policy for the